A map can hold secrets that rewrite history. We are about to examine 20 ancient maps that depict lands and continents long before their official discovery. By the end, you will see the entire timeline of human exploration in a startling new light. How could a 16th century chart show Antarctica without its ice, a continent hidden for centuries? What forgotten voyages left their mark on parchment, only to vanish from the record? This journey confronts the fragile nature of knowledge itself. Piecing together a puzzle that suggests our past is far more mysterious than any textbook reveals. What does it mean when the old maps know more than the historians? The legend begins in the dusty archives of Istanbul's palace. In 1913, a group of historians discovered a stunningly detailed world chart drawn on gazelle skin, signed by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer. Dated to 1513, the map was immediately recognized as a masterpiece of its era, depicting the known world from the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa to the eastern shores of Brazil. But it was the land drawn far to the south, beyond the tip of South America, that ignited a century of debate. This mysterious coastline, labeled as a southern continent, bears a chilling resemblance to the Queen Maud land region of Antarctica. A landmass buried under miles of ice and not officially discovered until the Russian expedition of 1820. The most baffling detail is not just its presence, but its shape. The map appears to show the continent's actual coastline, the land beneath the ice cap, a profile impossible to chart without advanced technology. Himself provided a clue in the extensive notes written in Ottoman Turkish directly on the map. He states plainly that this was not an original survey, but a compilation. He references 20 source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century before the Common Era, and even mentions using a map drawn by Christopher Columbus. This admission shatters the simple narrative. It suggests the admiral was a curator of fading knowledge, piecing together a jigsaw puzzle of older charts that depicted a world far more completely understood by lost generations of explorers. The theory that ancient civilizations possessed the capability for global navigation is no longer fringe speculation when faced with this parchment. Could the source maps have come from a sophisticated seafaring culture like the Minoans, or from the great library of Alexandria before its destruction? Their knowledge preserved in scattered fragments that eventually reached an Ottoman scholar. The map does not show a perfect Antarctica, and many scholars argue it is a misdrawn South America or a speculative southern land. Yet the nagging accuracy of certain coastal features, aligned with modern subglacial topography, refuses to be dismissed. This single artifact forces a profound question. How much of human history is simply the story of remembering what we have already forgotten? The map is not an anomaly, it is a whisper from a deeper past, and our next chart turns that whisper into a shout from the other side of the world. That whisper from the Ottoman archives finds an echo in a very different library, one housed at Yale University. Here rests a map that, if authentic, is arguably the most valuable single sheet of parchment in the world. Known as the Vinland Map, it was presented to the public in 1965 with a claim that sent shockwaves through the historical community. Dated to around 1440, a full half-century before Christopher Columbus sailed, the map depicts a sprawling, unfamiliar landmass in the western Atlantic. It is labeled in Latin as Vinland, a place described in Norse sagas as a land of wild grapes, discovered by Leif around the year 1000. This simple drawing is a direct cartographic witness to a Norse presence in North America, a fact later confirmed by the archaeological discovery of a Viking settlement at meadows in Newfoundland in the 1960s. The map seemed to be the perfect piece of paper proof, bridging legend and history, showing that European scholars were aware of lands across the ocean long before the age of exploration was said to have begun. But from the moment it was revealed, the map was shrouded in suspicion. The controversy did not center on its historical implications, but on the very substance of the ink on its surface. Initial analysis raised alarms. A key component of the ink, a pigment called anatase, was a synthetic form of titanium dioxide not commercially available until the 1920s. This finding pointed decisively toward a modern forgery, a clever hoax created to capitalize on the excitement surrounding the Norse discoveries. The case appeared closed, a fascinating but fraudulent footnote. Yet, like any good mystery, new evidence complicates the story. Recent, more advanced studies using particle accelerators to analyze the ink's chemistry have introduced staggering doubt. Researchers now suggest the anatase could be a natural byproduct of the medieval ink-making process, created from iron gall ink contaminated with common minerals. Furthermore, the parchment itself has been radiocarbon dated to the correct period, the mid-15th century. The map is physically old, that much is certain. The question is whether the drawing on it is equally ancient, or if a skilled forger centuries later acquired a blank medieval page to create the ultimate historical deception. This transforms the Vinland map from a simple artifact into a high-stakes detective story, where the tools of modern science both condemn and vindicate it in turns. Beyond the laboratory debates, the map's true power lies in the story it tells. It depicts Vinland not as a vague, mythical island, but as a defined part of a larger, unknown continent, with Greenland accurately shown as an island. This suggests the information came from a navigator's first-hand account, not a scribe's imagination. If genuine, it means that knowledge of the New World, however fragmented, was preserved in European monasteries and map rooms, a secret waiting to be rediscovered. It rewrites the discovery narrative from a single moment of genius to a slow, intermittent remembering of a forgotten contact. The map embodies a profound tension between what we think we know and what the physical evidence allows us to believe. Its ambiguity is its lesson, reminding us that history is not a settled record, but a perpetual inquest. And as we move from the frozen North Atlantic to the warm waters of the Pacific, another map presents a puzzle that is geographically even more impossible to explain. The line between discovery and delusion blurs completely with our next chart, a document that feels like a fever dream of the North Atlantic. Published in Venice in 1558, the Zeno map is a cartographic ghost story. It depicts a scattering of islands with evocative names, places you will not find on any modern globe because they are not there. They are phantom islands, born from sailors' tales, coastlines, or pure myth, lingering on maps for centuries and confounding real navigators. Yet within this archipelago of fantasy lies a solid, stubborn core of truth. The map shows Greenland with a shape that is recognizably accurate, and to its west, a vast coastline labeled as that many scholars interpret as a crude, early depiction of the North American mainland. This is the maddening paradox of the Zeno map, a work that is simultaneously wildly wrong and startlingly right. The story behind it is just as layered. The map was published by a descendant, Zeno, who claimed it was based on letters and charts from his ancestors, the Zeno brothers. Venetian nobles who supposedly sailed into the North Atlantic in the late 1300s. According to the narrative, they encountered fishermen who spoke of distant lands and even served at the court of a prince named, a figure often linked to the real Scottish noble Henry. The tale has all the elements of a medieval adventure, complete with shipwrecks, foreign courts, and reports of a land where the people had cities and used written language. For centuries, the entire account was dismissed as a clever forgery, a fabrication to give Venice claim to New World discoveries ahead of Spain and Portugal. The Phantom Islands were seen as proof of its fictional nature, but modern scholarship has introduced a compelling twist. While the Zeno brothers' personal saga may be embellished or invented, the geographical data embedded in the map seems to echo something much older and more authentic. The accurate rendering of Greenland is not knowledge that would have been common in Venice in 1558. It points directly to Norse sailing charts, the practical navigation maps used by Viking sailors who had been traversing those frozen seas for hundreds of years. The Phantom Islands themselves might be tragic cartographic errors, but errors based on something real. For instance, could be a persistent of Iceland, or even a snow-covered vision of the island seen from a distance in poor light. Could be a mangled report of Labrador or Newfoundland. The map then becomes a palimpsest, a later Italian copy of a much older Norse understanding of the North Atlantic, one that had been passed down, distorted, and festooned with legend through generations of retelling. This transforms the Zeno map from a simple hoax into a profound lesson. It shows us that ancient cartography was rarely a science of pure survey, but a process of compilation and interpretation. A mapmaker would take a trusted older chart, add new reports from recent voyages, and fill the remaining blank spaces with educated guesses or long-held myths to create a complete picture. The Phantom Islands were not necessarily lies. They were placeholders for the unknown, stubborn ghosts that refused to be exorcised, until someone finally sailed to those coordinates and found only empty ocean. The map's true value lies in this messy blend. It is a snapshot of the medieval mind at work, trying to reconcile hard-won navigational facts with the powerful allure of rumor and ancient story. It proves that even within a work of great imagination, fragments of lost truth can survive, waiting for us to look past the monsters on the edges and see the real coastline hiding in plain sight. And if a map can preserve whispers of a new continent across an ocean, what happens when a chart seems to describe the entire world with impossible precision? Thousands of years before it should have been possible, while the Zeno map wove fantasy with fragments of truth, another chart was born from pure, high-stakes espionage. The Planisphere of 1502 is not just a map, it is a stolen treasure. Its very existence is a story of international intrigue, created not for public knowledge, but as a state secret so valuable it was worth risking everything to obtain. An Italian agent, working for the Duke of Ferrara, managed to secretly copy this detailed world chart directly from the closely guarded Portuguese royal archives in Lisbon. He was not a scholar, but a spy, and his mission was to deliver to his patron the most precious commodity of the age, the geographical knowledge that defined global power. What he smuggled out was a breathtaking snapshot of the world at a pivotal moment. The map shows with stunning clarity the coast of Brazil, discovered by the Portuguese explorer just 2 years earlier in 1500. The accuracy is not speculative, it is precise, depicting the distinctive eastern bulge of South America with a confidence that reveals just how quickly and thoroughly the Portuguese were documenting their new finds. This was not a prediction of lands unknown, but a real-time report on a geopolitical revolution captured on vellum. The Planisphere lays bare the brutal competition of the age of discovery. For Portugal, this map was the master blueprint, containing the routes to the spice riches of India, the gold of Africa, and the untapped potential of the New World. Possessing it meant controlling trade routes worth kingdoms. For the Italian spy and his duke, securing a copy was an act of industrial and political espionage, an attempt to bypass Portuguese monopoly and claim a piece of the future for themselves. The map itself is a work of art, rich with color and illustration, but its beauty belies its ruthless purpose. Every carefully drawn coastline, every named trading post along Africa, every rendering of a Portuguese ship in the Indian Ocean was classified information. This document makes it clear that within just a few short years of first contact, European knowledge of distant continents was not vague or mythical. It was systematic, detailed, and fiercely protected. The speed of this cartographic capture is what truly astonishes. From the first sighting of an unknown shore to its precise incorporation into a master reference chart, the process was lightning fast, driven by national ambition and commercial greed. The Planisphere stands as a testament to a simple, powerful idea. In that era, a map was not just a guide, it was a weapon. And as we will see, this race to chart the world would soon produce maps whose accuracy seems to defy the very timeline of exploration itself, pointing not to recent voyages, but to sources lost in deep time. The stolen intelligence of the map gave Europe a picture of the present, but one German scholar was already drawing the future. In a small workshop in the Duchy of Lorraine in 1507, cartographer Martin and his collaborators were assembling a document that would shape the identity of an entire hemisphere. Their world map, printed from 12 separate woodblocks, is celebrated for one obvious and monumental act. It is the very first printed document to label the newfound southern continent with a new name, America, a Latinized tribute to the explorer and navigator. With that single word, a landmass was christened, and a name echoed into eternity. Yet for students of cartographic mystery, this famous act of naming is almost a distraction from the map's true and staggering enigma. Look closely at the western edge of this new America. There, depicted not an endless, unknown land, but a thin, vertical strip of coastline, and beyond it, an immense and empty ocean. He labeled this vast blue expanse the Oceanus, the Western Ocean. This was nothing less than a depiction of the Pacific Ocean, a body of water no European explorer had yet seen or even suspected existed. Balboa would not fight his way through the jungles of Panama to stand upon a peak and sight this ocean for another 6 years, in 1513. Ferdinand Magellan would not give it its peaceful name for another 13 years after that. So how did a scholar working in landlocked Europe correctly infer the existence of the world's largest ocean, years before any official discovery? Left clues in the text that accompanied the map, a book called the. In it, he and his colleague explained their reasoning. They had studied the accounts of who had sailed far down the eastern coast of South America, described the sheer, unbroken length of this new land, and the powerful currents flowing southward along its shore. To the scholarly minds in Lorraine, this suggested a monumental geographical truth. They reasoned that this newly encountered land could not be a mere island or a peninsula of Asia, as Columbus had believed. Its scale implied it was a separate continent, a fourth part of the world. And if it was a continent, then logic dictated that, just as Africa was separated from Europe by the Mediterranean, this new continent must be separated from Asia by another, equally great sea. It was a breathtaking leap of scholarly deduction, a hypothesis drawn from the logic of symmetry and the patterns of the known world. They essentially predicted the Pacific Ocean based on theoretical geography. This transforms the map from a simple record into a prophetic document. It represents the moment when the human mind, armed with fragments of new data, began to correctly assemble the true architecture of the planet. It shows cartography not just as a practice of recording, but of active, brilliant reasoning. Yet, a haunting question lingers. Was it truly all just a brilliant guess? Some researchers point to subtle details, like the map's curiously accurate depiction of the western coast of South America, a coastline no European would map for decades. Could have had access to lost Portuguese charts, or perhaps to whispers from Asian sources that spoke of a great eastern sea. The map remains a beautiful paradox, a work that is both a testament to the power of human intellect and a potential repository of secrets from voyages history has forgotten. In naming America, it gave the New World an identity. In drawing the Pacific, it revealed that the greatest discoveries are sometimes made not on the deck of a ship, but at a draftsman's table, where the lines on a map can reveal the hidden lines of the world itself. And if a map can predict an ocean, what happens when another seems to recall the precise contours of a continent from an age when it was free of ice? The prophetic lines of the map revealed a world waiting to be understood. But one French geographer attempted to draw what no one had ever truly seen. Published in 1737, the map by is a fascinating hybrid, a work of bold scientific theory rendered in the confident lines of a cartographer. It does not claim to show a discovered coast, but instead presents a hypothetical southern continent, a Terra deduced from the logic of global symmetry. Envision this land not as a single mass, but as two large islands separated by a frozen sea that stretched from the pole. For its time, this was a reasonable academic conjecture, an attempt to fill the last great blank space on the globe with reasoned geography. Yet this is where the map transcends its own theory and enters the realm of the inexplicable. In the 20th century, with the advent of radar and seismic sounding, scientists finally pierced the Antarctic ice sheet to map the true continent beneath. What they found was a startling echo of a two-century-old guess. The continent is, in fact, comprised of two major landmasses, East and West Antarctica, separated by a vast subglacial basin filled with ice. The general shape proposed aligns in a way that feels less like a lucky guess and more like a distant, distorted memory of a real topography. So how could an 18th-century scholar, with no technology to see beneath miles of solid ice, produce a map that even vaguely resembles the hidden truth? Himself provided a critical clue in his writings. He stated that his work was not pure invention, but was based on earlier source maps and the reported sightings of explorers who claimed to have seen distant southern lands. While many of these reports described icebergs and frozen seas, a few hinted at something more substantial. The most compelling possibility is that had access to fragments of knowledge passed down from much earlier voyages. Perhaps from the same deep well of ancient cartography that informed the map over 200 years prior. His map, therefore, becomes a unique artifact in our journey. It moves us firmly from the realm of direct, if mysterious, depiction into the world of theoretical reconstruction. It shows how the persistent idea of an unknown southern land was not just a myth, but a scientific hypothesis, one that was sometimes accidentally informed by slivers of much older, forgotten data. Was likely trying to make sense of conflicting sailors' logs and outdated charts, weaving them into a coherent model. In doing so, he may have unconsciously preserved the ghostly outline of a continent's true form, a silhouette seen not through ice, but through the fog of time. His map teaches us that even a wrong idea, if it is built upon ancient fragments, can accidentally point toward a profound truth. It represents the moment when scholarly deduction and lost knowledge briefly converged, drawing a line on a page that would only be by science centuries later. This raises a compelling new question: if a theoretical map can hold such secrets, What profound realities might be encoded in a chart that was never meant to be a map at all? Theoretical maps like draw their power from a beautiful tension between logic and legend. A tension perfectly crystallized in one of history's most unusual world charts. In 1531, the French mathematician and cartographer presented the world with a puzzle in the shape of a heart. His cordiform map projects the globe onto an elegant, symmetrical heart shape, an artistic choice reflecting the Renaissance fascination with geometry and divine harmony. At the very bottom of this ornate design lies a massive, sprawling landmass labeled Terra, the southern land. This was not an original idea, but a direct inheritance from the ancient Greeks, who believed the world's continents must be balanced for stability. A large north required an equally large south, a philosophical concept so compelling it persisted for over 1,000 years. Yet its depiction is curiously detailed. His southern continent is not a vague blob, but a land with indentations, promontories, and a distinctively shaped eastern coast that some researchers, with the benefit of modern maps, argue bears a passing resemblance to the actual coastline of Antarctica, particularly the area of the sea and land. This resemblance is too loose to be called a match, but it is also too specific to be dismissed as pure geometric fancy. So what are we seeing? Was a brilliant academic, working within the strict confines of classical theory. He was almost certainly drawing this land from philosophical first principles, not from any secret chart. But the Renaissance was also a time of information flooding into Europe from all corners. Portuguese caravels were pushing south along Africa, Spanish ships were wrecking on uncharted coasts, and tales from Arab traders and Asian merchants filtered into the ports of Venice and Lisbon. It is entirely possible that, in compiling his map, incorporated snippets from these disparate, often contradictory reports. A sailor's description of a fog-shrouded coastline seen far to the south, a line on a captured Arabic chart indicating land beyond the known world, a rumor from a Malay pilot about icy seas. Any of these fragments could have unconsciously guided his pen as he gave form to the theoretical Terra. His map, therefore, becomes a masterpiece of layered meaning. On one level, it is a beautiful artifact of a wrong idea, the enduring myth of continental balance. On another, it may be a mosaic, pieced together from real, if misunderstood, data points from the very edges of human exploration. The line between philosophical deduction and secret knowledge is not just blurred here, it is artistically intertwined. The heart shape itself is a metaphor for this fusion, suggesting that the drive to map the world was both an intellectual exercise and a profound, almost emotional, yearning to complete the picture of our planet. Work asks us to consider that every myth contains a kernel of truth, and every theoretical line drawn on parchment might just be tracing the ghost of a real shore. Waiting centuries for someone to arrive and call it by its true name. This blending of the scholarly and the speculative reaches its most dramatic expression not in a European library, but in a document that claims to chart the heavens and the earth from a perspective that should not have existed. The heart-shaped world of represented a philosophical ideal, but a map published just 28 years later presents a vision that feels shockingly modern. Created by the Ottoman cartographer in 1559, this world map is a masterpiece of geometric precision that seems to leap centuries ahead of its time. At first glance, its clean lines and surprisingly familiar continental shapes could be mistaken for a map from the 18th or even 19th century. The coastlines of Africa and South America are rendered with a clarity that European charts of the era often lacked, but it is the depiction of the Pacific Rim that truly stops historians in their tracks. The map shows the western coast of North America, from present-day California up toward Alaska, with a detail and accuracy that simply should not have existed in the mid-16th century. European knowledge of this coastline was virtually existent at that point, based on little more than rumors from a handful of Spanish expeditions that had barely scratched the surface. Yet here it is, drawn with confidence. Even more startling is the suggestion of a land connection between Asia and North America, a thin isthmus that perfectly corresponds to the idea of the Bering Strait land bridge. A geographical and migratory concept that would not enter mainstream science for hundreds of years. This is not the work of a guess or a philosophical deduction like Terra. This feels like the work of someone who had access to a different set of data entirely. How could an Ottoman scholar, based in an empire centered on the Mediterranean, possibly know the shape of the American West Coast? The most compelling explanation lies not in Ottoman voyages, but in Ottoman libraries. Himself hints at this in his writings, suggesting his work was a compilation. The Ottoman Empire at its zenith was a colossal crossroads of knowledge. It absorbed the cartographic traditions of the Arab world, which had preserved and expanded upon the work of the ancient Greeks like Ptolemy. It had access to trade routes that brought maps and reports from the Far East, from Chinese and possibly even Korean sources that may have held their own understandings of northern Pacific geography. Furthermore, through its complex relations with European powers, it likely acquired Portuguese and Spanish charts, perhaps even secret ones. This map may be the single best surviving example of a global synthesis, a fusion of Eastern and Western geographical understanding that was compiled in Istanbul but drew from sources now lost to history. It stands as a powerful corrective to a Eurocentric view of discovery. The map reminds us that the great libraries of Constantinople, before and after its fall, were repositories for a vast, interconnected web of knowledge. When we look at the map, we are likely seeing a ghost image, a reflection of an ancient, pan-global understanding of world geography that was fractured and forgotten as empires rose and fell. It suggests that the true picture of the world was assembled not by one culture in a linear progression, but in fits and starts by many, with crucial pieces of the puzzle sometimes surviving only in the most unexpected places. This raises a haunting possibility. What if the most accurate world map of the 16th century was not drawn in Lisbon, Rome, or Antwerp, but in Istanbul? Pieced together from the scattered pages of a dozen different civilizations. And if a single map can hint at such a vast, lost library of knowledge? What happens when we find a chart that claims to be a direct copy of something impossibly older, while the map hinted at a fusion of global knowledge in Istanbul? An even older and more profound synthesis was being created far to the east. In the year 1402, in the royal court of the dynasty in Korea, scholars completed the map, a sweeping vision of the world that challenges our most basic assumptions about who knew what and when. This magnificent silk scroll, over 5 feet wide, presents a vast, interconnected Afro-Eurasian landmass with China, quite naturally at its center. But to dismiss it as a work of cultural pride is to miss its staggering implication. Here, drawn with clear detail, are the peninsulas of Arabia and India, the full expanse of Africa with its southern tip pointing eastward, and even a recognizably shaped Europe complete with the boot of Italy and the Iberian Peninsula. This was created 85 years before the Portuguese explorer would round the Cape of Good Hope, proving a sea route to the Indian Ocean. So how did Korean cartographers in the early 15th century know the shape of Africa? The answer lies in the silent, relentless flow of information along the greatest knowledge network of the pre-modern world, the Silk Road. That was not born from Korean voyages, but from scholarly compilation. Its creators openly credited their sources, Islamic world maps brought to East Asia by Persian and Arab traders, combined with the accumulated records of Chinese explorers and diplomats who had traveled west for centuries. This map is a tangible product of intellectual commerce, a meeting of Mongolian, Islamic, and Chinese geographic traditions on a single sheet of Korean silk. It proves that sophisticated understanding of the world's continents was not a European secret, but a shared treasure circulating among the scholarly elites of Asia long before European caravels left their docks. The map has its own curious distortions. Africa is elongated and the Mediterranean is shrunken. But these are the errors of synthesis, of translating knowledge across vast linguistic and cultural distances. They do not diminish the map's revolutionary message. Look at Europe, drawn small and on the distant western fringe. From this Korean perspective, Europe was not the center of discovery, but a remote and somewhat accurately reported periphery. It expands our mystery beyond the Atlantic Ocean. It shows us a polycentric world, where multiple civilizations were simultaneously mapping their reality, trading that knowledge, and sometimes, inevitably, letting fragments of it slip away into the fog of war. Dynastic collapse, or simply changing scholarly fashions. This map did not show the Americas, a blank space to the east that would soon be filled with catastrophic consequence. But its very existence asks a humbling question. What other discoveries, what other complete pictures of the world were assembled in other great libraries, only to be lost when those libraries burned? There is a surviving whisper of that alternate cartographic history, one where the lines on the map were drawn not by the compass of a lone explorer, but by the collective wisdom of a connected hemisphere, patiently passed from hand to hand along the ancient roads between empires. The map reveals a world already mapped by interconnected civilizations, but in Europe, a different kind of map was about to ignite an explosion. It was not a new discovery, but a very old book rediscovered. In the early 15th century, a Byzantine scholar brought a copy of Claudius Ptolemy's to Italy, a text written in the 2nd century that had been lost to the Latin West for over 1,000 years. This was not merely an antique, it was a revolution bound in parchment. Ptolemy provided a complete system, a method to project the spherical Earth onto a flat surface using lines of latitude and longitude, a concept that had faded into obscurity. His work offered a ready-made grid, an empty but perfectly ordered canvas upon which the entire world could be rationally placed. For European scholars bursting with new reports from sailors, this was the ultimate operating system, a software update for the medieval mind. Yet, this powerful tool came with a profound limitation. Ptolemy's own map ended at the west coast of Europe and the east coast of Asia, with the vast, unknown southern hemisphere labeled simply as Terra, an unknown land. He knew nothing of the Americas, the Pacific, or the true shape of Africa. This set the stage for an intellectual conflict that would define the next century. When explorers like Columbus returned with tales of new islands and coastlines, the first instinct of the mapmakers was not to start a new map, but to update the old one. They desperately tried to force these new discoveries into Ptolemy's ancient framework. Columbus himself believed he had reached the outer islands of Asia, a conviction supported by Ptolemy's own underestimation of the Earth's circumference. The new data was literally crammed into the margins of an old world view. You can see this struggle on printed Ptolemaic maps from the late 15th century, where the outline of Africa is awkwardly extended southward, or where a strange new landmass is tentatively sketched in the western Atlantic, straining against the classical borders. The authority of the ancient text was so immense that it often distorted reality, causing cartographers to bend the reports of living sailors to fit the theories of a scholar who had been gone for 1,300 years. This tension is the core drama of Renaissance cartography. It was a battle between the weight of tradition and the shock of the new, between the trusted words of a classical authority and the confusing, first-hand accounts from men who had sailed off the edge of the known world. The Ptolemaic maps are a testament to a profound human tendency. We often understand the new only by filtering it through the old. They provided the essential structure that made systematic exploration possible, but they also became a cage that had to be broken. The very grid that allowed the new world to be plotted would eventually be shattered by its existence. That grid of classical learning was a scaffold for discovery, but the real knowledge of the world was held in the hands of those who sailed it. Long before scholars in their studies debated Ptolemy, a different kind of mapmaker was at work in the bustling port cities of the Mediterranean, creating tools not of theory, but of survival. These are the Portolan charts, and they feel alive in a way no other map of their era does. Drawn on sheepskin or goatskin parchment, their surfaces are a vibrant spiderweb of crisscrossing lines radiating from central windroses, each line a sailing route known as a rum line. The coastlines are not sketched as artistic impressions, but drawn with a startling, intimate precision. Every bay, headland, and safe harbor meticulously recorded in a practical script. These were not for display in a prince's library. They were working documents, stained with salt spray and candle wax, carried in the chests of ship captains from Genoa, Venice, and Majorca from the 13th century onward. Their accuracy is not a mystery of ancient sources, but a testament to accumulated, hard-won experience, a living database of maritime knowledge passed from pilot to pilot over generations. A captain using a Portolan chart did not need to know the philosophical debates about the world's shape. He only needed to know that following this line for 2 days would bring him safely into the harbor of Ragusa, and that the wind from the southeast here was treacherous. This was cartography as a direct extension of human memory, drawn from the logbooks and the stories shared in harborside taverns after long voyages. Yet within this deeply practical tradition, whispers of the unknown sometimes appear. One remarkable example is the world map drawn by the Venetian Verga around 1413. It is a Portolan in its soul, focused on the Mediterranean, but it dares to look beyond. South of a reasonably well-drawn Africa, Verga depicted a large, strange landmass. It is not the theoretical Terra of the scholars, but a solid coast with rivers and mountains, labeled simply as a southern land. Could this be an early, vague report of Antarctica, based on some forgotten Portuguese or Arab voyage that had been pushed far south by storms? Or is it a speculative filling of the blank space, informed by the same sailors' rumors that spoke of distant, icy shores? The beauty of the Portolan tradition is that we may never know for certain, and that is the point. These charts were not concerned with proving a theory to the world. They were concerned with recording anything that might be useful for the next voyage. A strange coastline sighted on the horizon, even if never landed upon, was a fact to be noted, a potential landmark or a hazard to avoid. This means the Portolan charts represent a reservoir of pure, unvarnished observation, a layer of geographical knowledge that existed parallel to, and often ahead of, the official scholarly record. They are the closest thing we have to the raw data of exploration, before it was filtered through the lens of academia or national propaganda. When we look at a Portolan, we are not looking at a map of what the world was thought to be. We are looking at a map of what sailors knew it to be, one treacherous reef and one favorable wind at a time. And if these practical men sometimes drew lands that history has forgotten, it forces a humbling thought: how many other shores were seen, marked on a now lost chart, and then vanished from all memory except the sigh of the wind. In the rigging, the practical knowledge of the Portolan charts was transformed into something spectacular by a group of artists working on the northern coast of France. In the port city of during the 16th century, a unique school of cartography flourished, creating works that were as much royal treasures as they were navigational aids. Among the most famous is the atlas presented to King Henry VIII of England in 1542 by the French hydrographer Zheng. To open its pages is to step into a world of breathtaking color and imagination, where the coastlines are adorned with miniature paintings of bustling cities, exotic animals, and kings in their pavilions. Yet hidden within this artistic splendor is a geographical puzzle that has fueled debate for centuries. Attached to the south of the Indonesian islands on its map is a vast, sprawling landmass labeled Java. Its shape and position are tantalizing, for if you follow its eastern coastline downward, it bears a compelling resemblance to the northern and western shores of Australia. This was drawn more than 60 years before the Dutch explorer made the first recorded European landing on the continent in 1606. So what is this land? The maps are notoriously ambiguous, a beautiful blend of fact, sailor's rumor, and outright legend. The name Java itself suggests it might be a cartographic confusion, an enormous inflation of the real island of Java, mixed with reports from Portuguese and possibly even indigenous Southeast Asian sailors about lands further south. Some researchers, however, see a different story. They point to the remarkable detail on some of these charts, like the depiction of a place called the Dangerous Coast, a name that chillingly fits the Great Barrier Reef. They argue these features are too specific to be pure fantasy, suggesting instead that secret Portuguese voyages, desperate to find the source of the spice trade beyond their rivals, may have indeed sighted and charted parts of the Australian coast. Their discoveries, kept as state secrets, could have then leaked to French mapmakers through espionage or shared contacts, just as the Planisphere was stolen decades earlier. The Zheng Atlas and its kin from the school are perhaps the ultimate expression of the early modern mapmakers' dilemma. They were not just draftsmen, but information processors, drowning in a flood of new reports from a suddenly expanding world. A captain's log from a sketch from a Portuguese agent, an ancient Greek text describing a southern land, and a woodcut of a mythical beast from a travelogue all landed on the same desk. The cartographer's task was to synthesize it all into a single, coherent, and beautiful picture for a king. In this light, Java is not necessarily a map of Australia, nor is it simply a mistake. It is a hypothesis drawn in ink and gold leaf, a best guess at reconciling fragmentary data with the pressing need to fill the empty spaces on the globe. These maps teach us that in the 16th century, the line between discovery and decoration, between science and art, was wonderfully and productively blurred. They capture the thrilling, chaotic moment when the world was being rediscovered in real time. And every strange report from a returning ship had the potential to become a new coastline on a masterpiece destined for a royal library. But the most persistent ghost in the Atlantic was not a southern continent, but a single, stubborn island. For over 500 years, on chart after chart, a circular landmass appeared in the ocean west of Ireland, often drawn with a river or a channel cutting through its center. Its name was Brasil, an island of mist and mystery from Celtic folklore, said to be a place of advanced beings or eternal happiness, visible only once every 7 years through the fog. This was no scholarly theory like Terra. It was a piece of pure mythology that had earned a permanent address on the map. From the ornate Catalan Atlas of 1375 to the practical nautical charts of the 1800s, cartographers included it as a geographical fact, a fixture as reliable as the coast of Spain. Its presence created a powerful feedback loop between story and science. Because the maps showed it, sailors went looking for it. Expeditions were launched, captains altered their courses in hope of a glimpse, and countless logs recorded sightings that always, inevitably, melted back into the sea mist. The island's cartographic life was so long and so consistent that it forces a difficult question. Could a story that lasts for centuries be based on absolutely nothing? Some researchers propose that Brasil might be a distant, distorted memory of a real landfall. Perhaps an early Irish monk, sailing the Atlantic in a leather curragh, encountered a massive fog bank obscuring something like the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. A shallow area, rich with fish that could feel like a legendary bounty. Maybe a storm-driven Portuguese caravel, blown far off course, briefly sighted the cliffs of the Azores or even the coast of North America, and their garbled report filtered through the lens of existing Celtic myth into the circular island on the map. Brasil, then, becomes a symbol of something profound in the history of exploration. It proves that the mapmaker's pen was guided by two masters, the hard data of navigation and the deep, cultural stories that gave meaning to the unknown. The line between charted reality and enduring legend was not just blurry, it was often invisible to the man drawing the coastline. He was compiling all available information, and in an age where a sailor's tale was a primary source, a compelling story from a respected captain carried the same weight as a measured latitude. The island finally began to fade from maps only in the 19th century, not because someone proved it did not exist, but because steamships with precise chronometers finally sailed over every inch of its supposed coordinates and found only empty, deep ocean. Its disappearance is a quiet milestone, the moment when the last phantom of the old Atlantic was finally laid to rest by the relentless grid of modern measurement. Yet, in its 5-century reign on parchment, Brasil performed a vital function. It was a placeholder for wonder, a cartographic acknowledgement that the ocean might still hold miracles. It gave explorers a reason to sail a little further into the horizon, and in that search, even if they never found the island of legend, they often found something else entirely, a new current, an unexpected wind, or a real shore that had been waiting just beyond the edge of the myth. The phantom island of Brasil was a legend drawn from Celtic mists, but another map from the same era seems to capture a coastline of undeniable substance. In the year 1513, the same year created his famous chart. A different Turkish mapmaker produced a work that casts its gaze not west across the Atlantic, but east into the vastness of the Indian Ocean. This map depicts a massive, unnamed landmass sitting alone in the southern waters, its shape crude but curiously specific. Most striking is a deep, rounded indentation on its northern coast, a distinctive gulf that, when held against a modern map, aligns almost perfectly with the Gulf of Australia's northern shore. This is not a theoretical southern continent, but a land with a particular, recognizable feature. Drawn a full 156 years before the Dutch ship, made the first recorded European contact with the Australian coast in 1606. The implication is staggering, Yet the source is a complete blank. Who could have provided the data for this land, and how did it reach a Turkish cartographer? The map itself offers no journal of a voyage, no tale of a shipwrecked sailor. Its silence is the loudest part of the mystery. The most plausible explanation lies not in a single heroic expedition, but in the slow, patient accumulation of knowledge along the world's greatest maritime crossroads. For centuries before European ships entered the Indian Ocean, it was an Arab and Asian domain. Arab dhows, Chinese treasure ships under Admiral Hy, and Malay trading proas crisscrossed these waters with a familiarity born of generations. These sailors were masters of the monsoon winds, riding them from the coast of Africa to the Spice Islands and back. It is entirely within reason that a vessel, blown far off its intended course by a violent storm, could have been pushed south until an unknown, arid coast appeared on the horizon. A surviving sailor, or perhaps a navigator's rough sketch, would have carried the story of this land back into the trading ports of Java, Sumatra, or Calicut. From there, such a report would have become a piece of valuable intelligence, a curious footnote traded among merchants and eventually making its long journey westward. Through the networks of Islamic scholarship and commerce that connected the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea, and from there to Cairo and finally to Constantinople. This fragment of geographic data could have filtered into the hands of a Turkish mapmaker. He would have had no context for it, no name to give it, only a rough shape and the knowledge that it existed somewhere in the Great Southern Sea. He would have drawn it not as a discovery, but as a report, another piece in the endless puzzle of the world. This map forces us to reimagine the history of exploration as a mosaic, not a timeline. It suggests that the continents were not discovered in a clean, sequential order by one culture, but were encountered, forgotten, and re-encountered by many. The coast of Australia may have been known, in some fragmented, undocumented way, to the maritime cultures of the Indian Ocean long before it ever appeared on a European chart. The map is a testament to the sheer volume of human experience that has been lost, the countless voyages that left no monument, only a faint, distorted line on a piece of parchment in a library half a world away. It asks us a humbling question: how many other shores were once known, only to vanish from all memory when the trade routes shifted or the empire that recorded them fell? The silence of that unnamed southern land speaks to a world of lost voyages, but in a German workshop. A scholar was making noise with a bold prediction. Was not a sea captain, but a mathematician and astronomer, a man who believed the secrets of the earth could be unlocked not on the deck of a ship, but at a desk, with a compass and a head full of theory. In 1515, he produced a terrestrial globe, a physical object meant to model the entire world. On its surface, he drew a vast southern continent, a common enough idea for the time. But then he did something remarkable. He separated that continent from the southern tip of South America with a narrow, clear channel of water. This was not a land bridge or a speculative coastline merging into the unknown. It was an open sea passage. In doing so, had conceptually predicted the existence of the Drake Passage, the treacherous body of water between Cape Horn and Antarctica. Over 60 years before the English privateer Francis Drake would even sail there, and centuries before it was understood as a distinct geographic feature. How could a man who likely never left Central Europe correctly deduce one of the planet's most significant maritime gateways? This process reveals the fascinating methodology of Renaissance scholars. He was working with a fragile mosaic of information. He had access to the latest printed accounts, like the Letters of, which described sailing far down the eastern coast of South America and feeling powerful currents pushing southward. He studied the classical authorities, like Ptolemy, who argued for a balanced globe requiring southern lands, and then he applied his own mathematical and astronomical reasoning to these fragments. 2. The logic was compelling. If the new southern land was a continent, and if the currents reported by were so strong, it seemed reasonable that a gap must exist. A channel where those immense forces of water could flow unimpeded between the great landmasses. His globe was a hypothesis rendered in gores of printed paper, a three-dimensional argument built from deduction. Yet a tantalizing possibility lingers just beneath the surface of this scholarly triumph. The early 1500s were a whirlwind of clandestine exploration. Portuguese and Spanish ships were pushing boundaries, and their captains were often under strict orders to keep their most sensitive discoveries secret for reasons of state and trade. Could whispers from a returning sailor, sworn to silence, have nonetheless leaked into the taverns and scholarly circles of Europe? A vague report of a terrifying strait of endless wind and waves, south of the known world, might have reached its ears as an unverified rumor. This raw, terrifying data from the edge of experience would have been the perfect fuel for his theoretical engine. He would have taken that sailor's fearful story and refined it, giving it geometric form and placing it precisely within his model of a symmetrical Earth. This blurs the line between prediction and reception. Was a brilliant forecaster, or was he the academic who finally gave a formal shape to the terrified, half-remembered accounts of men who had barely survived a passage they did not understand? His globe embodies the moment when the learned world began to catch up with the brutal, first-hand reality of the explorers. It shows that the map of the world was being drawn in two places simultaneously, on the storm-tossed decks of caravels at the edge of the world, and on the orderly desks of scholars thousands of miles away. Both groups trying to solve the same magnificent puzzle with the very different tools they had at hand. His theoretical globe was a triumph of deduction, but what if the most accurate world map of its time was not a theory at all, but a working document for the largest fleet the world had ever seen? In the early 15th century, decades before Columbus or Magellan were even born, the Ming dynasty of China launched a series of voyages that dwarfed anything Europe would attempt for 100 years. Commanded by the Muslim eunuch Admiral Hy, these were not mere expeditions, but floating cities of diplomacy and power. His treasure ships, some reportedly over 400 feet long, carried thousands of sailors, soldiers, and scholars across the Indian Ocean, reaching the coast of East Africa and establishing a Chinese presence across Southeast Asia. For each of these epic journeys, the admiral's navigators would have relied on detailed sailing charts, meticulously updated with each new voyage. These were the practical Portolan charts of the East, born from direct observation and meant for daily use. Yet today, not a single original Hy navigation chart is known to survive. Their loss is one of the most profound silences in the history of exploration. We know of their existence and sophistication only from later copies, like the Mao map found in a 17th century military treatise, which shows a web of routes and coastal details from China to Africa. This secondary document hints at the staggering precision of the lost originals, charts that would have represented the sum total of Chinese maritime knowledge at its absolute peak. The sudden end of the voyages is as significant as their scale. After the death of the emperor who sponsored them, a new faction came to power in the Chinese court. They saw the colossal expense of the treasure fleets as a wasteful extravagance. In a dramatic inward turn, the state dismantled its ocean-going ambitions, halted further voyages, and even restricted the building of large ships. Many records of the adventures were likely destroyed, and the specialized knowledge of deep water navigation began to fade from official memory. This political decision did not just end a program, it effectively erased a world-leading geographic database from the culture's active consciousness. It is within this vacuum of lost knowledge that fascinating theories have taken root. Some researchers, examining certain later maps and ambiguous artifacts, have proposed that Hy's fleets, or ships blown off course from them, may have ventured far beyond the Indian Ocean. Could a storm have pushed a Chinese vessel across the Pacific to the Americas? Might reports of icy southern lands have reached the admiral's cartographers? Mainstream historians view these ideas with extreme skepticism, noting the complete absence of direct archaeological or documentary evidence from China to support such distant contact. The compelling power of the Hy story, however, lies not in proving these fringe claims, but in confronting the staggering scale of what was deliberately forgotten. It forces us to consider how the course of global history might have shifted if those detailed charts had not been lost. If that immense naval knowledge had continued to develop and perhaps even made its way into the broader world's understanding, the lost maps of Hy are the ultimate historical what-if. They represent an entire parallel path of discovery that was active, advanced, and then voluntarily abandoned. Their absence is a monument to a different truth, that the story of human exploration is not just a record of what we found, but a fragile narrative constantly reshaped by the choices of emperors and the fragile fate of parchment. When a society chooses to look inward, it does not just stop sailing, it can willingly forget the very shape of the world beyond its shores. That deliberate forgetting of the Chinese treasure fleet charts represents a monumental loss, but it is not the only one. The map which began our journey carries within its own notes a ghost of perhaps the greatest library ever lost. In his annotations, the admiral states plainly that among his 20 source maps were charts from the time of Alexander the Great, and others from a place he called the Island of. These brief mentions have ignited a century of speculation, weaving a tantalizing thread directly to the vanished wisdom of the Library of Alexandria. Could a map drawn in 1513 really be a distant echo of that legendary repository, a place where the geography of the entire ancient world was once compiled? A direct, provable link is impossible, a bridge across 1,500 years of silence and fire. Yet the idea itself speaks to a profound and verifiable truth about how knowledge, especially cartographic knowledge, survives. It is cumulative, and it is heartbreakingly fragile. Think of it not as a single map, but as a story passed down. A sailor in the 4th century before the Common Era draws a coastline based on his voyage. His chart is by a scholar in Alexandria. Centuries later, that copy is smuggled out before a library burns, finding its way to another center of learning, perhaps in Constantinople or Damascus. There it is again, translated and combined with newer reports. Wars, neglect, and the simple decay of parchment winnow the copies down to a precious few. By the time a diligent Ottoman admiral in the 16th century acquires one of these last remaining copies, the original voyage and the original cartographer are long forgotten, their names lost to time. The coastline on the page, however, remains, a stubborn fact outliving empires. This is the transformative concept. The map and others like it are not simple charts of their own era. They are palimpsests, layers of history. You are not just looking at the world of 1513, you are potentially looking at a snapshot of the world as understood by a Hellenistic geographer, preserved through a miraculous chain of copying and chance. Every accurate coastline, every strangely placed island, could be a fossilized piece of data from a civilization whose own records have turned to dust. This reframes our entire search. We are not just looking for maps that predicted discoveries. We are engaging in a form of intellectual archaeology, carefully brushing away the top layer of a document to see if something much older lies beneath. The lost library of Alexandria becomes the ultimate symbol of this process, not as a secret source of alien knowledge, but as the greatest single node in the ancient world's network of information. A place where countless such maps and logs were once stored, compared and synthesized. Its destruction did not erase knowledge in an instant, but it severed countless threads, leaving only the hardiest strands to be carried forward by chance. When cites Alexander the Great, he is giving us a glimpse of one of those surviving threads. The map becomes a message in a bottle, tossed from the shores of a lost intellectual continent, finally washing up in our hands. It tells us that our history is not a straight line of progress, but a cycle of discovery, loss, and fragmented remembrance. And if a single map can hold such layered echoes, what does it mean when we find an entire atlas that seems to compile the impossible geography of the ancient world? The line between a philosophical idea and a physical destination was often just a line on a map. For over 1,000 years, a single concept captivated scholars and kings, a vast southern continent they called Terra, the unknown southern land. This was not a rumor of a distant shore, but a logical necessity born from the ancient Greek belief in a balanced world. They reasoned that the great landmasses of the northern hemisphere must be counterweighted by an equally massive continent in the south, a place of immense riches and temperate climates. This elegant theory, repeated by scholars from Ptolemy to the Renaissance, slowly hardened into cartographic fact. Mapmakers, needing to fill the blank southern oceans, drew it in with increasing detail, adorning its speculative coasts with forests, mountains, and notes about potential gold. It became a geographical fixture, a place that simply had to exist. But a line on a map is a powerful thing. It becomes a target, a promise, a call to action. This is how a philosophical idea written in a library 2,000 years ago directly set the course of a British naval vessel in the 18th century. When Captain James Cook set sail on his first epic voyage in 1768, his secret admiralty orders contained a clear, primary objective. He was to sail south into the Pacific and locate the great southern continent, claim its riches for the crown, and finally turn myth into empire. Cook was a brilliant navigator and a meticulous observer, and what he found was not a lush paradise, but the fierce, rocky coasts of New Zealand. He spent months charting its 2 islands, proving they were not attached to a larger landmass. He then sailed west, encountering the eastern shore of Australia, a land known only from partial, often secretive Dutch charts of its western side. Cook mapped its entire eastern coastline with stunning accuracy, claiming it for Britain. In fulfilling his mission to find the mythical continent, he instead meticulously charted the real ones, effectively erasing Terra from the map forever. His voyage is the ultimate demonstration of a cartographic myth's real-world power. The map did not just record the world, it actively created it. The theoretical lines drawn by scholars, repeated by mapmakers, and believed by kings became a script for exploration, sending ships, men, and nations into the unknown with a specific expectation. That expectation was wrong, but the search it prompted irrevocably changed the face of the globe. The story of Terra teaches us that exploration is rarely a pure search for the unknown. It is often a journey to confirm what we already believe to be true. The maps we create, whether based on fact, logic, or sheer imagination, become the blueprints for our reality, guiding our ships and shaping our history long before the true coastline ever comes into view. The philosophical lines drawn by scholars sent ships across oceans, but the truth of any map lies in the very fibers of its parchment. Modern science has turned the quiet study of these documents into a high-stakes forensic investigation. Where a historian once could only analyze the ink and vellum by eye and touch, today's researchers employ tools that feel like science fiction. Multispectral imaging cameras peer beneath the surface, revealing faded annotations, erased coastlines, or earlier drafts hidden for centuries. Radiocarbon dating pinpoints the age of the animal skin itself to within a few decades, telling us when the map could have been made. Most crucially, pigment analysis dissects the chemistry of the ink, atom by atom, searching for anachronisms that betray a forgery or confirm a timeline. This technological interrogation adds a thrilling new chapter to our mystery, transforming each map from a historical artifact into a silent witness that can now be cross-examined in the laboratory. The Vinland Map's turbulent history is the perfect example of this modern drama. For decades, its fate hinged on the presence of a single compound in its ink, anatase, a form of titanium dioxide. Initial analysis suggested it was a modern synthetic pigment, condemning the map as a brilliant 20th century fake. The case seemed closed, a fascinating deception, but science, like history, is rarely settled. More recent studies using advanced particle accelerators have complicated the story immensely. Researchers now propose that the anatase could be a natural contaminant from medieval ink production, a byproduct of common minerals ground alongside the oak galls and iron sulfate. The parchment's radiocarbon date has always placed it firmly in the correct century. So is it a genuine medieval document with a confusing chemical signature, or an impossibly clever forgery using period-accurate materials? The technology does not give a simple yes or no. It deepens the enigma, forcing historians, chemists, and physicists to collaborate in a way never before possible. This high-tech detective work extends far beyond questions of fraud. On the map, multispectral imaging might one day reveal fainter layers of writing or drawing, perhaps clarifying which of the admiral's 20 source maps were used for which section. On a fragile Portolan chart, analysis of the binding agents in the ink could tell us about trade routes for materials, linking the map to a specific workshop in Genoa or Majorca. Each scan, each spectral reading, is like developing a photographic negative of the map's hidden biography. We are no longer just reading the map. We are auditing its material history, asking the parchment where it came from and the ink what it is made of. This collaborative quest reminds us that understanding our past is not the domain of any single expert. It requires the historian's context, the cartographer's eye, the chemist's precision, and the physicist's tools, all converging on a single, fragile sheet of skin or paper. The maps themselves become a meeting point between the ancient and the ultra-modern, where a laser's pinpoint light might finally illuminate a secret that has waited 500 years to be told. These 20 maps are not isolated riddles, but pieces of a single, sprawling puzzle. When laid side by side, they force a staggering question upon us. Could the timeline of human exploration be profoundly wrong? The standard story taught for generations tells of civilizations developing in isolation, with a great age of discovery blossoming only in the 15th century. Yet this collection of charts, drawn from Turkey to Korea across centuries, depicts lands and oceans with knowledge that seems to leapfrog that timeline entirely. Antarctica without ice, the Pacific Ocean predicted, the coast of Australia hinted at, the shape of the Americas emerging decades before Columbus sailed. Individually, each map can be explained away as a lucky guess, a cartographic error, or a clever forgery. Collectively, they form a pattern that is difficult to ignore, a chorus of whispers suggesting that our ancestors may have been far more connected and far more knowledgeable than our history books dare to admit. This pattern has, understandably, fueled dramatic theories. Some propose the existence of a single, advanced seafaring civilization in deep antiquity, like Atlantis, whose global voyages were recorded on master maps later and fragmented. Others look beyond our world entirely, suggesting this cartographic precision could only come from an outside, perhaps even extraterrestrial source. These ideas capture the imagination, offering a clean, spectacular answer to the mystery. For mainstream historians and archaeologists, however, the evidence for such cataclysmic revisions simply is not there. No shipwrecks, no settlements, no trade goods, no contemporary writings corroborate a globe spanning Bronze Age empire or otherworldly visitors. The maps exist, but the physical proof of how their data was gathered does not, at least not in the form these grand theories require. So if we set aside the most sensational explanations, what are we left with? Scholars point to a more complex, though no less fascinating, web of possibilities. First, we must never underestimate the sheer skill and courage of ancient navigators. The Polynesians, using only the stars, waves, and flight patterns of birds, settled islands across millions of square miles of open Pacific. The Vikings crossed the North Atlantic in open longships. The Austronesian peoples spread from Taiwan to Madagascar. It is entirely plausible that other, now forgotten cultures achieved similar feats, their voyages leaving only faint echoes in later maps. Second, the catastrophic loss of records is a constant in human history. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is just one famous example. Countless other repositories of knowledge in Carthage or Baghdad have been lost to fire, war, or simple decay. A single surviving chart from a lost library could preserve a coastline for 1,000 years after the civilization that first mapped it had crumbled to dust. Third, the process of cartography itself was a creative act of synthesis. A mapmaker would blend hard data from a sailor's log with philosophical concepts, like the need for a southern continent, and fill the remaining blanks with myths and rumors that had circulated for centuries. A place like Brazil could begin as a real sailor's report of a fog-shrouded landfall, be absorbed into Celtic folklore, and then be dutifully recorded by a medieval scribe as a geographic fact. The line between observation, deduction, and legend was perpetually blurred. And finally, yes, coincidence and brilliant deduction played a role. A scholar studying the accounts of, could logically infer the existence of a great ocean west of the Americas. It was a brilliant guess that happened to be correct. The true answer, then, is not one grand revelation, but a subtle tapestry woven from all these threads. It is a story of incredible human journeys lost to time, of fragile knowledge preserved by chance, of scholarly intuition that sometimes bordered on prophecy, and of the enduring power of story to shape our perception of the world. These maps do not necessarily rewrite history with a single stroke, but they irrevocably complicate it. They reveal history not as a straight line of progress, but as a spiral where knowledge is gained, lost, fragmented, and then partially recovered centuries later. They teach us humility, showing that our current understanding is always provisional, built on the visible tip of a much deeper and mostly sunken iceberg of human experience. The final lesson of these 20 ancient charts is not about proving a specific theory, but about embracing a more expansive, more mysterious, and ultimately more human story of our relentless, imperfect, and wondrous attempt to draw the world. From the ice-free coasts on the map to the speculative southern lands of, our journey through these 20 ancient charts reveals a world far more interconnected and inquisitive than our textbooks often allow. They are not a collection of random errors, but a chorus of whispers from across time, each one suggesting that the human story of exploration is older, messier, and far more remarkable than a simple timeline of official discoveries. These documents force us to confront a humbling truth, that knowledge is a fragile flame, easily guttered by the winds of political change, the decay of parchment, or a society's decision to turn its gaze inward. What we call a discovery is often just a remembering, a moment when a fragment of lost understanding finally finds its way back into the light. These maps are more than historical curiosities. They are testaments to the irrepressible human drive to explore, record, and understand our planet. They were drawn by scholars in candle-lit studies, by spies in shadowy archives, and by sailors who had stared at a strange coastline emerging from the mist. Each line in ink was an act of courage, curiosity, or cunning, a deliberate attempt to make sense of a vast and bewildering world. They remind us that history is not a simple timeline, but a tangled web of knowledge, loss, rediscovery, and sometimes brilliant error. A philosophical guess could predict an ocean. A sailor's tall tale could become a fixed landmark for centuries. And a single sheet of vellum could preserve the memory of a continent for 1,000 years after the civilization that first mapped it had crumbled into dust. The next time you look at a modern, perfect digital map on your screen, remember the centuries of mystery, courage, and controversy that paved its way. That pinpoint accuracy was bought with a price paid in forgotten voyages, shattered ships, and the stubborn dedication of generations of mapmakers who worked with the fragments they were given. Our world is no longer blank, but the spirit that filled those spaces, the relentless need to see what lies beyond the horizon, is the same spirit that guides us today. If this exploration of cartographic secrets captivated you, delve deeper by subscribing for more journeys into history's greatest enigmas, and let us know in the comments which map you find the most mystifying.